Hello and welcome to part 2 of our presentation on graphic design. So last week we touched on the basic topics of graphic design and kind of gave just a general overview of the field. And today I'm going to dive into a subset, kind of a subsection of design, and that is infographics. So on the first slide here you can see I put together a basic infographic. I have on the left contact information, office phone number, email address, with some icons there. On the right, a little bit about me. I'm married, my family there, 3 kids. Design thinking, something I'm passionate about. In the middle, you can see Kansas, from Kansas, live in Kansas. So I grew up on a farm out west in a little town called Otis. So I have some graphics there that kind of represent that. I teach web and digital media design on the K-State Polytechnic campus. And before that, I was the creative director for the university on the main campus in Manhattan. So just by putting all that information together in kind of a visual presentation, it's a little more interesting than just a normal slide with text and just the numbers and data there. So that's basically what an infographic is. So we'll dive into all about this here in a second. But first, I wanted to touch on design thinking, which ties in really well with the subject of infographics. I like this quote here. The goal of a designer is to listen, observe, understand, sympathize, empathize, synthesize, and glean insights that enable him or her to make the invisible visible. So, basically that's kind of what a designer does. We take complex subject matter, and then we present it in a way that makes sense. And so we're, in essence, taking the invisible, which is kind of the concept and theory behind the data, and presenting that in a way that makes it easy to understand for the viewer. So this ties in really well with infographics, because in design thinking, it's a flexible process. It's based on collaboration between designers and users, with the overall idea of bringing those ideas to life based on how real users think, feel, and behave. So there's kind of a 5-step process. First, using empathy to kind of understand where the user, the viewer, your audience is coming from. Defining any kind of questions that you have. So you're really defining that question, defining the subject matter, and then you're generating as many ideas as you can. You're prototyping that, so maybe putting together ideas for an infographic, and then you're testing that by bouncing ideas off of your peers, coworkers, fellow students, things like that. So this really ties into kind of how an infographic goes about being created. And a basic definition I have here for an infographic, it's just the visual presentation of information. It could be in the form of a chart, graph, or other image, other graphic, accompanied by minimal text, with minimal being a keyword there, intended to give an overview that's easy to understand, often on complex subjects. So the example I have here, I guess I wouldn't consider this to be a complex subject, but it does a nice job of illustrating, what an infographic is. So you have 2 comic book characters here, Captain America and the Hulk, and so this infographic is just basically telling you what their personalities are like. So the Captain America character has a lot of heart, pretty good amount of brains. He's really well-rounded. Versus the Hulk, who has just tons of physical strength, doesn't have a lot of brains, but so that really gives you an overview of what that character is and what they're about. So that's an infographic. And infographics have been around a really long time. So even going back to around the 300s BC, you can see here is a trade route map that some archaeologists found, and it's illustrating different points on the map where trade was being conducted, the routes of that trade. And so by definition this would be an infographic, because we're presenting information in a visual way. And infographics have progressed throughout history. Starting there in the top left, that's kind of where we were with the map there. There was a lot of maps being charted, different routes, things like that. So it was all hand done. And you get into the Industrial Revolution, where industry started to become more prevalent, and you see even more charts and illustrations that are presenting data. And then there at the bottom, you kind of get into the advent of the computer, and that's really when infographics become even more popular because they're easier to reproduce on the computer. And fast forward to today, our present day, there's just so much information that is being bombarded. You're getting it from everywhere, from your phone, computer, TV, just advertising, coming from everywhere. And so the job of a designer, when it comes to infographics, is taking that data and presenting it in a simple, easy to understand way that the consumer or the viewer, the audience can understand and digest in a really short amount of time. Because where there's so much information out there, that you're really fighting for the consumer's time. So by using infographics, that can aid in that process. So where can you use infographics? These are just a few ideas. Really, if you think about it, anywhere where you're presenting data or trying to answer a question, that would be a good use of infographics. So posters, PowerPoints, brochures, any kind of research publication, tons of infographics on the web, annual reports, just any kind of report in general. All good uses of infographic. So this example here, I wanted to go through some examples of work that I've done with infographics, kind of take you through the process. This one here is from a magazine, so it's an editorial example. The story was about a student who biked from Kansas down into Mexico, and the story was kind of talking about his journey. And so when the editor was coming up with the story, she met with me and the designers and kind of talked about what topics, what parts of the story would really be enhanced by infographics, any kind of visual representation. So the idea was, this map of Mexico kind of showing where the most violent parts are, where there's lots of drug cartels and things like that, would be interesting to kind of show, how that compared to his journey that he took. And by doing that, you kind of get a sense of, where what were the dangerous parts of his journey, where did those happen? And then with the other little illustrations there, kind of gives you a sense of place and culture that he encountered throughout the journey. These examples here are a little more numbers based. So the one I wanted to talk about here is under fundraising with the line graph there. So the first thing that your eye is probably drawn to is that number right there, the 211 million in the fiscal year of 2014. And so by doing some tricks with typography where you make that number larger, you make the text for that a little bit brighter, it really calls attention to that number, which is what we wanted to do. We wanted the reader to be drawn in and see, we wanted to highlight that year was a really good year for fundraising for the university. So just by using those tricks with typography and color, you can really tell the viewer, what you want to show as the most important data to be presented. On the right, just some examples of illustrations, some little icons, how just using those to help tell the story in a little bit more visual way instead of just using text. So these here are some bad examples of infographics. The one on the left, there's just so much going on there that you don't really know where to start. You kind of get lost. You don't understand what's going on. They're trying to show all the different social media platforms that are being used, and so there's just too much information going on. It's so cluttered. that you look at it after a couple seconds and just kind of really check out. There's no need in looking at it anymore because there's just so much. On the right, trying to use this idea of the bubbles and then topics that kind of overlap, which is commonly used in infographics, but with this example here, there's probably too much information going on. It's just too complex. So you really have a hard time trying to figure out what they're talking about here. Probably would have been better to simplify this a little more, maybe break it up into a couple different infographics instead of trying to get everything into that one. Some other mistakes that are kind of common, your numbers and data don't add up. So on the left there, you see the pie chart, and if you add up those numbers, you come up with a number that doesn't equal 100%. So that just kind of makes you look a little foolish. So really check your numbers and your data. Make sure you're using the right type of chart. So sometimes maybe a pie chart is best for percentages instead of a line chart or something like that. So really kind of think about the data and what type of chart is going to be the best to present the data. Including too much information, like in those examples previously, there's just too much. So you really want to simplify it and get down to the core facts that you're trying to present, and then forcing the reader to do more work, like the social media example. Again, there's just so much going on that you're really forcing the reader to have to think more than they should, and using easy to understand comparisons would be something to really think about as well. Don't use comparisons that don't make sense or are too hard to understand. So I'm going to go through some tips on infographics. First one would be to think about your target audience. Who is your target audience for your infographic? And so by getting that figured out, you can choose colors, typography, any types of illustrations that might be based on the target audience. So the example here is an infographic about facial hair. So obviously the target audience is probably males, older males that are able to grow facial hair. So you can see the colors and the typography and stuff like that are probably a little more masculine. So just something to think about, your target audience. It can really help dictate your design as far as colors, typography, layout, and things like that. Keep it simple. The example here does a really nice job of presenting some information in a very simple way, easy to understand way, using the comparison there. It's just using a little bit of text and some percentages and the illustrations there, and a nice, easy to understand, you get the point right away. Keep it focused, and by that I mean try to just touch on one topic at a time. Don't try to solve too many problems at once in the infographic. So the example here is talking about crude oil imported from Libya, and that's really the only topic that they're tackling in this infographic. So, they didn't introduce other topics to make it more complicated. So, that really helps you with the design, but also helps your target audience as well, keeping in that focused on one topic. Show things visually. Again, using illustrations, things like that to help visually show what your topic is about. And it just makes the piece a little more fun. So like this example here, using those illustrations, it helps break up the text and keep the audience engaged longer. And make sure you're checking your facts and citing your sources. So this is really important. So like an example here where there's lots of numbers and data being presented, make sure that you're checking those numbers, you're using reliable sources, and that you're citing those sources because you don't want to present false data or anything like that. So really important to think about that as well. So just some tips on getting started. The first one, you're asking a question, you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to present a solution to that question or that problem in the form of an infographic. So number two, you're developing a hypothesis for that question, or maybe there already is an answer. So then it's just a matter of finding that. Again, making sure you're using reliable sources for that. Collecting and analyzing the data, so going through that data and deciding what is the most important data to share and present in the infographic. Number 4 is taking that data and kind of charting it out. What's going to work best visually. What do I want to present in a visual manner? So a lot of this is a matter of taking lots of notes and sketches, sketching things out on paper ahead of time, and then taking any kind of taking your research, the text that you come up with, and then it's a good idea to get as much text put down right away in the beginning of the process, but then taking that and trying to figure out what's the most important pieces of text to present in the infographics. A lot of times it helps to just summarize it in bullet points. So that'll really help you come up with the overall design of your infographic. And then the last step, then you're taking that text and the data, your ideas for the charts and all that, and you're kind of putting it all together in a design that works. So that's when you start thinking about typography and color and layout and things like that. So the last part of the presentation here is just going over some resources that you can use. These are online resources. So the first one is called Visme. You can just Google that. It's just an online product there with some basic design tools to help you create infographics, so you can do shapes and charts and text and stuff like that. The second one's called Canva, and it's a little more complex. It's I believe you do have to pay for that service, but it does have some more options that you can use. Again, these are all online that you can just log into an account and create designs with them. Third one, Google Charts, a really good tool for creating like bar charts, pie charts, any kind of graphs where it's more data driven. This would be a good tool to use, pretty similar to like what you'd find in Excel. And then Pictochart, again, is another nice tool for putting together charts in a more visual way. So it has some basic design tools in it as well. You could always use Microsoft PowerPoint would be a good tool to use because it's a little more free-flowing than Microsoft Word. You can drag and drop shapes and pictures and text and things like that and kind of arrange it in a nice design. Again, probably the best tools would be the Adobe Creative Cloud products like Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, InDesign. Those would be the best tools. But again, those are a little more technical. Is what professional designers use. So, you'd have to do some training on using those tools, but they have the most options for creating, really advanced infographics. So, but any of these other tools would be good to start with and would be a nice starting point for basic infographic creation. So that's it. Thank you for your time and good luck with your infographics.